Hello and welcome to another episode of Stars and Startups with me, Varun Pumri. If you're a first-time listener, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. All links can be found in show notes. On this episode, I speak with Beerud Sheth, who was a co-founder and CEO of popular freelancing work platform Elance, that is now Upwork. Beerud went on to found Gupshup, a cloud messaging platform that has seen its share of twists and turns in the messaging and communication space since 2004 and now processes over 4 billion messages a month. Beerud joined us from his home in California for this call. Let's say hi to Beerud. Hi Beerud, welcome to the show. So happy to have you. We've probably pushed this conversation for a couple of weeks, but I'm glad that we could get you on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And better late than never. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. So you spent a little bit of time at IIT, and then you went to MIT, and you studied computer science, right? And you did that as your degree. And then you went on to become an investment banker right after. So in the heyday, in the 90s, you studied computer science, and then you went on to be a banker. How did that happen? Because I would imagine you did computer science because it is exciting, and you wanted to do that. And then you wore the banker suit.
I think so. Firstly, yeah. I mean, I was fortunate to have an exceptional academic record. IIT, I was a silver medalist there. MIT also computer science and so on. And then I was in my PhD program at MIT where I kind of suddenly realized, I was obviously introspecting and so on, but I realized that I didn't see an academic career for myself, right? Which means becoming a professor and things like that. I figured, just given my inclinations, my interests and so on, I like tinkering. I figured that the best way I can have impact was sort of through the world of business, but not just traditional business, right? The intersection of business and technology, right? So with IIT and MIT, I had as good a technical background as one could have. But I was lacking that sort of business experience. And, a couple of options, I did take some business courses at MIT while I was there. Mm-hmm. But then I said, look, let's just get some experience. And also, you'd be surprised, but there's not as much difference as you think between Wall Street and computer science, right? Because there was also the time where the world of finance was being transformed. And they were hiring computer science majors, math majors, physics majors, and so on, because the modeling of securities and the stocks and bonds and all that is all leveraging stochastic analysis and mathematical simulations and computer science, ideas and so on. So it was sort of a natural fit. I was more on the trading side rather than the investment banking side. But so I was doing a lot of, in the beginning, I was modeling these securities, and later I got to know it as well as anyone. So I was also trading them. I became a sort of bond trader for a while. But, then at some point, I got to the point where, once everybody figures out how to do these valuations, it really becomes a buy low, sell high kind of game. And it's very lucrative and profitable, but it wasn't mentally stimulating for me, at least personally. So that's where I sort of left, Wall Street and said, okay, meanwhile, while I was on Wall Street, the internet happened, Netscape IPO and so on. And we'll talk about that. But that's where I sort of came back to this intersection of business and technology. So I think that's the way I see it.
Were you a good trader? Were you making money hand over fist?
I think so. I mean, for a little bit, yes. But also you realize, a rising tide helps and a waning tide hurts. So around, I think it was the 98 financial emerging markets currency crisis. Right. And at that time, I mean, every once in a while, right. And then you had it in 2001 .com crisis, 2008 and so on. Right. So every once in a while, these sort of external factors hit you and it doesn't matter, right? Because anything you've modeled based on 100-year history, those models don't work by definition when something outside that range happens, right? So I think, yeah, there was a phase where it was great. And then when this happened, I think just across the board, anyway, I was a junior trader, so it's not like I had a lot at risk, but the firms were not doing well and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, the internet was like changing the world. So that's where yeah, that's where I switched, or rather got back to my real calling. I think think of it as my business school experience on Wall Street. Yeah.
So the height of the dot-com bubble, well, just before it reached its peak, you decided to go and start probably an iconic brand, Elance. And that was in 98,
Yes.
97, 98?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. So in fact, it's a great question, right? So I was on Wall Street, um, and Elance was sort of the culmination of basically sort of two or three ideas in my head, or rather my life experiences. Right. One was coming from India. I knew that there were a lot of talented people all over the world. Right. It's just that they may not be in New York, but they are just as talented as anybody else, and not just India, but maybe Brazil, Philippines, Turkey, or wherever. That was sort of one experience. The other experience was being having studied computer science. We were at that time, things that we take for granted now were not commonly known, but I realized that the internet was such a powerful tool for connecting people, right? And for the longest time, people didn't know what to do with this thing called the internet, but it really shortened distances. It connected strangers who didn't know each other but could work with each other, right? So that was my sort of computer science and internet experience helped with that. And then the third thing was my Wall Street experience helped me realize that you can basically create a marketplace for just about anything. Okay, not just for liquid things like stocks and bonds, but also for illiquid things like derivatives or like services, software development services, or logo design or graphic design. So you take those three things, put it together, and that gives you Elance, right? It became sort of an online marketplace for freelancers, connecting freelancers from around the world, a liquid marketplace where you can get multiple bids and see what it is. And really, I think that was the culmination of that. So it was, I mean, we were already, and to put in some more context, right? So this is now 97, 98. At this time, Netscape had happened. Now after Netscape, which sort of created the browser, which then led to the portal. So Yahoo had happened, which then led to, meanwhile, e-commerce, Amazon had happened, eBay had happened already, right? These companies were growing. And we said, okay, if these spaces are all taken, what is the next big opportunity? And what we said was, look, all of e-commerce was focused on the commerce of goods, but what about the commerce of services, right? Intangible, virtual, deliverable services. That whole, and in fact, if you look at the global economy, service is a much bigger part of it than the goods economy. So we said, okay, that's where we came up with the idea of Elance. Yeah.
But did you spend time with this segment to say, okay, you know what, there's a problem to be solved?
I think I approached it, more analytically than sort of intuitively. And, I think there's different ways of discovering or figuring out business ideas and so on. I think it was more, in fact, it's funny, like literally when we got started with Elance, the first experiment we did was, I rounded up a bunch of, students at IIT Bombay, of course, because I was there, and it was the summer. And these guys were all technically supposed to be doing summer internships, but, they were bored out of their minds and said, look, you can now do software coding or, build websites and so on and get paid for it remotely through a website. And, here's a list of projects, you can bid for it and you'll get paid for it. And first they didn't believe that could happen. And like a few days later, they were like, just, blown out of their mind saying, wow, we can just work remotely. So they actually made more money from Elance over their summer internship than their actual internship. And it got going, right? So in some sense, like I said, we had an intuition for it. I know that people had this need. The reality of it, right, is look, in running Elance, we realized very quickly it wasn't the supply side that you needed to know there's a problem, because that supply side problem exists and still exists. There's far more supply than there is demand for. Right, there are millions and millions of freelancers, and there's not enough work through these online channels to offer to them. So really, for the success of this business depended on, or was gated by, how much demand could you generate, right? So the hard thing was actually finding businesses. And now this is, again, in the late 90s, you're trying to explain people to do remote work, and they're like, well, how can I trust somebody who I've never met? I like doing business face to face. How can I trust somebody who's in a different time zone? Like, when will I even talk to them? Are they professional? What if they steal my money and run away? What if, this and that, right? There were just a whole lot of just really mental blocks. And if you think about, actually, think about the last 6 months, we have this forced global experiment in remote work, that suddenly everybody's realized, wow, remote work works. And I was just thinking to myself, while I don't wish a pandemic on anyone, but where was the pandemic when I needed it 20 years ago?
Right. Well, when you brought up payments and, as it is a marketplace, there are two separate questions I have, right? One, payments that has to happen globally, right? Because people are around the world. And on the other hand, you also have to find people globally to want to participate. There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, the Google didn't exist at that point either. So how do you solve the demand and supply problem? Because you have to create that's what you require to create a functional marketplace.
Exactly. No, I think that's the challenge with the two-sided marketplace, right? You need to, because if you have supply and don't have demand, then they get bored and go away. If you have the demand but not supply, then they're like, look, there's nobody to do business with. So you need both in balance at the same time, and that was particularly hard. But look, the freelancer communities were very well organized. There were a lot of forums. There used to be what's called mailing lists and online forums and distribution lists and mail serve and so on. And NTP was the sole forum service and so on, right? So there were a lot of these other alternative things. There's also a lot of word of mouth in these sort of developer communities and so on.
Okay.
Right. So that turned out, the hard part wasn't getting a lot of freelancers, but figuring out the quality of freelancers, right? Who's good, who's not. And also over time, see, it's not just the skill set, right? But it's the mindset, it's the professionalism, it's the responsiveness. It's sort of, ultimately the job has to get done, or being kind of flexible, because you're dealing with different people in different cultures where, I'll do it tomorrow means a different thing in America than it does in India sometimes, right? Now, of course, all these differences are blending, but in some parts of the world, it's just an indication, like tomorrow could be day after or 5 days from now, right? Versus here, if you say tomorrow, it means tomorrow. So I think there were a lot of these issues to be figured. But like I said, I think the supply side was a lot easier. The demand side was a lot harder. And we had to, just explain, figure out different things, like saying you can lower your cost, or you can but we didn't want to emphasize cost too much. We want to say, look, you can find an amazing, set of talent that may be hard to find in Silicon Valley or in New York and so on, right? So get access to better talent faster and cheaper than alternative things, right? What we found were certain pockets took to it a lot easier, right? Young and new startups were like, yeah, this makes sense. I'm having a hard time hiring. Of course, why not, right? And they're also tech savvy and can do it, right? While some others, traditional companies or traditional individuals, right, they would sort of struggle with it, because sometimes, I think in remote work, I mean, the onus, you need to be precise and well documented to a much greater extent than in the offline world, because in offline you can go give feedback back and forth. No, change this, change that, and so on. It's harder to do that across time zones and so on. So anyway, so I think we had to, just create a lot of tutorials, a lot of education, a lot of customer support, a lot of arbitration, and so on, to facilitate all of this, and also to build tools like, an invoicing system, a milestone-based payment system, an escrow system, a global payment system, so that both sides could trust, right? Because they're like, oh, wait a minute, they may not pay me, right? Or I'll pay, but they won't do the work, right? So now you need to build trust and all of this. So there were a whole bunch of operational issues that we had to figure out.
Was that all methodical? Like, did you think about all of these, or you kind of figured it out on the way? You said, okay, you know what?
No, I think, so I think, so me and my co-founders, I mean, we spent about, I think 3 to 6 months before we actually got started or raised the first money, sort of really fleshing it out, right? Because there's a lot of different things around, it looks very obvious in hindsight, but a priori, I mean, figuring out these things is very hard. Like say,
Hmm.
what category should we have? And, which categories do you think will work? Like in the beginning, for example, we said, okay, we'll do, software and design and accounting and legal and translation and this and that. Well, accounting and legal never took off because I think it's just a different kind of, you want to see face to face, your lawyer or your accountant. But software development, graphic design, tech-based services were just fine, or design-oriented things. So which services to do, and what kind of tools, because it varies by category as well, and what kind of go to market, because where you find those freelancers, right? How do you find accountants versus how do you find developers is very different, and so on, right? So of course there was a lot of planning up front, but look, any entrepreneur knows that no marketing plan survives first contact with the customer, right? So soon as you launch, you look at the data and you're constantly analyzing, evaluating, course correcting, adjusting, refining, learning, and so on. So what we did a lot of A/B testing, a lot of conversations with customers, figuring out what works, what doesn't, and taking from there.
So you were not the sole founder. You had others who had worked with you. How did you guys meet? How did you guys hash out the idea?
Right. So great thing. So one of my founders, Srini, he was actually also a different IIT, but an IIT grad, and was also on Wall Street. So initially we were just discussing investment ideas and so on. And then it sort of said, hey, here's an opportunity. And the other was Sanjay, my classmate from IIT Bombay, who I'd done a ton of projects with, I knew very well, would trust my life with, and so on, right? So I think that made it really, I mean, it's funny how all these old relationships kind of revive and survive. And this formula has worked even at Gupshup. I mean, it was really just a lot of IT connections, alumni connections, and so on. Same thing for funding, right? Our first round of financing was just a lot of just friends and connection, because all of us, you come here as immigrants, you don't have family here, you don't have a lot of money, but you have these relationships, and that's a gold mine, and that's what we leveraged. Yeah.
So the first round was an angel round, just friends and family kind of scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly friends, no family, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we had was, so what you have is you have alumni that are further ahead of you in their careers. If they've had some exits, if they have had some startups, or if they're working at an investment bank or something, they have a little bit of money, so they'll invest a little bit. But more importantly, so we had like 4 or 5 friends like that, but each of them also brought in another 3 or 4 friends each, right? From their respective circles. So between Wall Street, where we had some connections, and Silicon Valley, we were able to get it funded and get going. Yeah.
The markets are of course surging that time, so chances were they could liquidate some stock and funnel it into other interesting things.
You're right. I mean, I think it was a boom time. Certainly, it was an internet frenzy. A lot of companies were going public, and a lot of valuations were skyrocketing, and so on. So it was a great time. It was somewhat irrational. I mean, a lot of money wasted, a lot of money lost. But at the same time, I mean, it was a game changer, right? I mean, what survives today would not have happened were it not for that.
Was that the reason why the merger happened with Odesk as well, or was there a different reason?
No. So that's actually much later, right? So let me just sort of fill in some gaps, right? So in '98, we started Elance, and that was in New York actually, and the New York equivalent of a Silicon Valley garage was like a 2-bed apartment in an apartment complex. And we grew to about 20 people that in the daytime would come to the office, and then in the evening would go, and our neighbors would wonder like, what the hell is going on here, right? But I think that was great. And then a year later, we actually moved to Silicon Valley, lock, stock, and barrel, all 20 people from New York to San Francisco, right? Because we got funded by Kleiner Perkins. We raised, right? So we did a big round, maybe a $12 million round then came to Silicon Valley, started growing, grew up to a couple of hundred people. And that was in 2000, we did another round, like $50 million and so on. Luckily, just before the stock market collapsed. And then when it collapsed, it was a really stressful time, because all these plans that you have go out the window, right? Because your customers don't have money to spend, and you don't know what's going to happen. Will you ever get another funding round, and so on. So if you have huge marketing plans, you can't spend it all. You got to be careful. There's no point marketing because your customers are not spending anyway, right? So I think, in fact, we pivoted from this sort of B2C like model to a B2B, a business model.
Okay.
And we did that for a while, and after some time sort of gave up on it, right? So now I was at the company from 98 to about 2004 or 5, something like that. Because once it became more enterprise focused, I was not less interested. But the strange thing was, soon after I left, we again refocused on the original business model, right? So that's been very resilient, and today it's still the same thing. The Odesk merger happened much later. It was in 2014, actually, right? Okay. So it was about 15 years after Elance had been around. And Odesk itself was founded in, like, I don't know off the top of my head, maybe 2005 or 6 or something like that. So about 5-6 years after Elance had been founded, right? Now, we had focused on what you call fixed price projects. They had focused on sort of hourly time and material based stuff. Yeah. Right. So, but there was a huge need for outsourcing. So different models were all growing. I was, even after I'd left, I was still on the board of the company. And then, so like I said, 15 years later, Elance and Odesk merged. It was rebranded to Upwork. And then in 2018, Upwork went public, and it's now a publicly listed stock out there. So yeah, long story. It was and it's kind of funny. A lot of people hear about it then and thought, it was like an overnight success that was 20 years in the making.
It's unfortunate that people don't see that journey, right? I'm sure there's enough ups and downs, but you kind of, you left in 2005 to start Gupshup. Was that like a decision that, you wanted to move on and do something different? And what happened to Elance at that point? Because you were the CEO of Elance.
Well, no, actually we had hired when we focused on the enterprise side of the business, it made sense to have somebody who had enterprise sales experience, because it's a very different kind of thing, right? Yeah, so a little bit before I'd left, we had hired an enterprise style CEO. And, I was okay with that. I mean, I think you got to ultimately do what's right for the company. So when I left, I think for me, it's always about, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I'm a tinkerer. I'm always ideating, thinking about problems and solutions and so on. Some, of course, you do, some others you invest in or advise and so on, right? So I do a lot of that. But yeah, so I think, once it sort of focused a little more on the enterprise side, and I didn't, at that stage in my life, I didn't have that sort of expertise. It didn't make sense for me to hang around. So I said, okay, well, let's find the next thing to do. And that's how we started Gupshup, which again, like I said, sort of more alumni, IIT alum connections. There was a guy called Rakesh Mathur, who's himself a very accomplished serial entrepreneur here. And he had invested in Elance. He had founded Jungli before that himself. So anyway, he had invested in Elance. So he and I sort of, got started with Gupshup. Also, one of my classmates, Vishy, joined us very early. And then the Gupshup story began. Yeah. And even that had quite a few twists and turns. Yeah.
What's your take on, we touched on future of work and, how Upwork has kind of enabled, and Fiverr is the other big giant in this space, has enabled this whole remote working, future of work. And now there's also access, right? People anywhere with just a mobile phone could access work and give that. How have you seen this evolve? You said that, enterprises were where you sold majorly, but now it seems like a lot of the businesses that use this kind of a service, typically SMEs, small businesses, they can't afford to have a full-time employee, and they're willing to break up their jobs into smaller pieces, right? And give it to different folks and then kind of do the project management themselves.
No, so I think, a lot of what I described earlier was, look, it was in the late 90s and early 2000s, right? I mean, the world has changed a lot since then. And even more so more recently, right? Because look, if companies go to full work from home model, now it doesn't matter whether you are, where you're located. It doesn't matter anymore whether you're full-time or part-time, because You could be full-time for a project, accomplish it, and then move on to different things. Employees get a lot more flexibility. They could be working for 3 companies on a project basis as opposed to one. Employers get a lot more flexibility because now you can get a talent pool, a global talent pool, and so on, different price points. So I think it's no longer SME and sort of small projects. In fact, a lot of growth for Upwork itself is coming from large enterprises, and because large enterprises themselves are looking for this flexibility, right? And they're realizing that businesses have to be nimble so that they can adapt to these kind of dramatic circumstances, right? So I think a freelance model gives that opportunity to both employers and freelancers to to pick and choose what they like to do, what they want to do, to live where they want, to get paid what they want, and so on. So I think it's just great. In fact, it's barely, in spite of how big these companies have become, they barely scratched the surface. I think they talk about it's like an opportunity that's I don't know, tens, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars worth, because you look at the entire staffing industry and you look at the entire outsourcing industry and you look at all of that is yet waiting to be disrupted, right? And it's inevitable. I think it's going to happen, and it's going to be models like, now obviously you need to build more layers. It can't just be an open marketplace where you put out a project in the public and so on. Sometimes you want it to be private. Sometimes you want a verified freelancer, or you can ensure security and quality and things like that. So there's a lot of things yet to be built, and that is being built. Yeah, the world has changed so much in the last 3-6 months. Remote work adoption has happened in 6 months. Yeah.
I mean, I think that industry, has seen so many up and down cycles, right? In like 2 decades. It's
it tells you sometimes if you're ahead of your time, it can be challenging. I mean, that's the hazard, occupational hazard of entrepreneurship, right? Because you have a vision of the world, that the world has to change, but the real world has a lot of inertia for a variety of reasons, right? I mean, good or bad, that's just the case. And sometimes you don't know how fast or how quickly some of these things will change. I mean, the hardest thing as an entrepreneur is patience, right? Sometimes you just have to be patient. You have to wait for the market to come to you. The world has a mind of its own. Customers have a mind of their own. So Upwork is, fantastic. I mean, it's sort of right time, right place now. But of course, for most of the first 20 years, it was like a really difficult thing to convince what today we now take for granted, right?
Well, talking about taking for granted, I mean, I want to get into the Gupshup story a little bit. We're talking about messaging, and Gupshup's core business proposition is messaging and communication, right? Do you want to give a quick primer on Gupshup? What do you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, right? So Gupshup is what's called a cloud messaging platform, right? Enterprises and businesses that need to communicate with their consumers. So let's take a bank or a e-commerce company or a retailer or an airline and so on. They need to send information to their customers either because they're required to by regulations or because customers expect it, right? So a bank will say, okay, your check is cleared, or your credit, you spend 100 rupees at Starbucks on your credit card. Or an e-commerce company say your package is arriving tomorrow, here's the status, or here's the order confirmation. Or when you book an airline or a hotel or whatever, right? There's many use cases. And when they need to send these messages, they connect to Gupshup. We provide a single API, right? A cloud hosted API. And then in turn, when they send us a message, we deliver the message to the device. Right now, traditionally, a lot of these, the bulk of these messages would be delivered through mobile operators, as a traditional SMS. But now there are many more channels that are opening up as well, right? WhatsApp is one example. There is RCS coming up, and then even Gupshup is again pioneering or innovating IP messaging, which is a newer channel. And the benefit of these new channels is the messages can be a lot richer. If you think about SMS, it's just plain text. It's restricted to 160 characters. You cannot reply to an enterprise SMS. But with all these IP-based messages, it could have images, it could have rich media, it could have cards and buttons. You can click on the button and interact with it. You can reply to it and have a conversation, which means now you can talk to customer support or talk to chatbots, automated chatbots, and so on. So I think, we are basically a messaging platform, but the world of messaging itself is transforming from traditional SMS based messaging to IP based messaging, and we are driving that transformation. So it's a very exciting time, a lot of opportunity to innovate, and I think it's going to have huge impact. I mean, I'll talk more about it, but this is going to transform the way businesses and consumers talk to each other.
Speaking of WhatsApp and messaging and rich communication, WhatsApp for Business, of course, has really taken off on the SME side, where if you're having a small shop, you're setting up your WhatsApp account, and then you can actually communicate. And I think it's actually increased business for a lot of small folks. I heard a VC saying WhatsApp, or rather messaging, was the original super app. Did you ever feel like right after, of course, Elance, that should have been the calling, like a WhatsApp like service? I think there were quite a few at that point.
Well, yeah. So I think you're right. I mean, look, we focused on the India market, and at that time it was all feature phone heavy. So we focused on SMS. In fact, initially we did try and succeed with a consumer-based SMS service, just like Twitter, which became quite huge. It had like 70 million users in India at a time in around 2010, at a time where Twitter or Facebook had barely 1 million users each, right? So we were sort of the first and the largest social network in India. But the cost of the SMS really killed us, because as more and more users started using it, we had to subsidize all of it, and it got expensive. So I think, look, some of these things, even entrepreneurs or founders, I mean, they'll say we didn't know how big it could become or would become, and so on, right? There was a time where BBM or BlackBerry messaging was huge, and then Nokia had some things, and then of course WhatsApp came about. There were many other versions as well. And I think, meanwhile, we were focused at that time. Actually, again, we switched to the enterprise side, so we were already focused on the enterprise side, right? So it's sort of it's hard for a company to do multiple things. You kind of have to place a bet and kind of go with it. And when things explode, a lot of things are happening all around you, and you can't it can screw with your mind if you're always worried about what someone else is doing. I think you just focus on what you're doing and be good at it and scale it up. And I think we're in a great place. I mean, we're not we've scaled our business up to quite an extent. We are over 100 million in revenues annually, and we've business. We have some of the top enterprises in India and international as well using us very extensively, and we are pioneering a lot of new things, right? So you made an interesting point. Messaging is indeed the new platform, or the new operating system, if you will, right? It's no longer just a tool for person-to-person communication, but it's a platform like an OS on which a lot of different applications are going to be built, right? So you can do, and the best example of this, by the way, is WeChat in China, right?
I was going to say WeChat and QQ, right? Just massive.
Exactly. No, but even QQ doesn't have all the services that it's owned by the same company, but WeChat in particular went way beyond messaging, right? Because with WeChat, you can do, you can do banking, you can do e-commerce, you can, do payments, you can do transactions.
And you can do laundry.
Yeah, you can do laundry, or, there's some amazing videos on the set of things you can do. You can play games, and you can, they have mini programs and mini apps and games and so on as well, right? So it's sort of a full-on app, and that shows you the real power of messaging. Because what's happening, right? I think, again, this is a bigger trend or a bigger idea, but if you step back, right? See, when in the big screen model, right? We had the desktop application model.
PCs.
When the web came about, right, suddenly everybody moved to sort of the server-side development model, saying, it doesn't make sense to have downloadable client apps. Users don't like to download, and developers find it expensive. You have to change it, download it, etc. Upgrades are difficult, and so on. So it's easier to do server-side software. It comes into your browser, and you just use it. Well, when we went to the small screen, because mobile networks were very slow in the beginning when Steve Jobs came about, guess what? He went back to this downloadable model, the app ecosystem, right? But the app ecosystem doesn't work very well, meaning there are millions of apps, but most of us have no more than 100, 150 apps at most, right? So what about all those other apps that, we do interact with these brands, but how many restaurant apps do you have? How many airline apps do you have? How many mall apps do you have, right? I mean, all of us will have our top 10 or top 20 apps, maybe a Facebook, WhatsApp, Uber, Ola, something, right? But you don't have a lot of different things. So I think the app ecosystem works for sort of the top 100, like the popular businesses, but the long tail really doesn't have a good way to engage with them. And that's where messaging comes in. Because with messaging, you don't need to download anything. You're just exchanging messages. You're transacting with that restaurant. You look up the menu, place the order, make a payment, and then you're gone and it disappears from your device. No download, no setup, no configuration, nothing, right? So I think this is where there's going to be a huge paradigm shift, right? As significant as the evolution of the web on the big screen, this is going to be now evolution of web through messaging on the small screen.
When you talk about WeChat, of course, the Americans have, almost everybody has an iPhone, and iMessage has started to now think about doing other things on it, but I still think they want to keep the messaging sacrosanct. Right? They have not really improved on that. Whereas Android, on the other hand, has basically allowed WhatsApp to flourish, but WhatsApp hasn't gone beyond messaging. At least in India, they even tried payments, but it has been stuck in a lot of regulatory challenges. Do you see something else filling the gap? Because I know that Android launched RCS, which they've been trying to, Google's been trying to push through for a couple of years now. And saying that SMS is dead, let's move this new technology and OEMs to adopt RCS. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity to do better, richer experiences. Of course, RCS is going to come. We've been waiting for it for years, and I don't know how much longer it'll take, but it's happening in bits and pieces. The way it's designed, you need the operators to do a lot of CapEx, and you need the handset manufacturers to update the device software. And on top of it, there's a lot of fragmentation around protocols and standards. So the interoperability is not clean and simple, right? So I think that's been a little frustrating. WhatsApp is going to fill some of the gap, not all of it, because WhatsApp is also very clear. They don't want all business messages. They really just want high value, high affinity messages that is not, that is all user driven, user opt-in, and so on and so forth, right? So WhatsApp is one part of the solution. RCS, when it comes, will be a small part of the solution as well. I think Google has something else called business messaging. That's going to be another piece of the solution as well. But I think we are also, Gupshup is introducing something we call, Gupshup IP messaging, or GIP for short.
Okay.
So this GIP messaging is also, I think, going to, what it really does is takes SMS to the next level, where you can take SMS and enable rich media, enable cards, buttons, chatbots, automations, AI-enabled services, and so on, right inside SMS itself. And ultimately, we are going from a single channel SMS-only model to this multi-channel rich messaging model with WhatsApp, RCS, Gupshup IP, and maybe Google Business Messages, sort of multiple additional things. Yeah.
How does Gupshup IP work then? Because you just replace your SMS. A lot of apps now, right? Microsoft has their messenger.
Sure.
Everybody wants to own your messenger. Truecaller wants to give access, wants to make the default messenger on my phone. How does this part take in my phone?
So a great question. I think we've done sort of 2 or 3 interesting things that work very well. So one is, of course, we have an app, right, that users can download. But in general, apart from like really tech savvy users, very few people actually modify their default messaging app, right? I mean, just empirically, that doesn't work, right? So for the people who do, we have that. Then in addition to that, we've done partnerships with handset manufacturers to embed some smart software inside their default messaging apps. Okay. So it's a little bit like you mentioned iPhone. In iPhone, it comes with iMessage, right?
Yep.
It's just part of the default SMS app, where of course you get your SMSs, but you also get these rich messages in there. Same thing here, where we've done this for Android devices. And that's already out there on about 120 million devices, where we can send these rich messages to the device because it has a smart client there. And then, now for other handsets where we don't have these deals, we are leveraging services like, we've created a sort of a chat widget that users can click through from the SMS. So it's one extra click, but then the whole thing is sort of a very rich conversational messaging app that they don't have to download, right? So it just runs in the browser, but it looks like a messaging app, and it's very brilliant. Right, but these are some of the details. The reality of it is, think of it as a combination of all three. And when enterprises send messages, they don't have to worry because which user will get which device. We automatically translate the templates and deliver it in the best possible way to these devices.
Isn't messaging driven by the functionality and ease of use for the customer and not enterprise? Because, for me, I always evaluate my phone, like, I have a OnePlus, and my SMS messenger now has some smart way that it just bundles up messages. Still the Microsoft product, which is Messenger, was so much cooler because it gave me like my financial history, was able to bifurcate a lot of things. It kept away spam. It wouldn't show me the spam folder, right? Which was great because I could set up that spam filter, and basically meant that only if I have any messages that are relevant to me, I'll even get a notification. And it also helped me manage my OTPs really well, right? Like, because today you get 100 OTPs a day. So I'm just curious, like how that basically plays out in the messaging world, right? Because for me, SMS app is dead. The SMS app is dead, because we've moved on to so many other things on the phone.
Well, so firstly, that advanced technology you described on OnePlus device is built by guess who? Gupshup. Okay.
Okay.
So we've embedded AI in the device to do message classification, to do message visualization. You may have noticed some cards and structured layouts that highlights key entities from the message and displays it correctly. There are additional things coming as well, right? I think in there. Now, the default messaging app has a lot of very high standards for stability and so on. So the development moves a little slower. We have a huge set of things in the pipeline, but it's not sort of fully there, right? So a lot of that, exactly what I was talking about earlier, these are, OnePlus is one of our partners, and there are a few other brands as well. So we are making the messaging app a lot smarter. Now, the point is not, look, there are different kinds, when you talk about the smartphone market, I mean, it's a very diverse customer base. There's lots of different preferences, right? It's really, each user may have their own preferences, but when we look at it from the other side, where they're saying, okay, there's like 3, 4, 500 million users. I mean, there's different segments who have different preferences. So no one solution will fit everybody, right? So that's not even the point, and we're not even trying to do that. But what happens is, you put it in the default messaging app that covers sort of the vast majority of users.
Yeah.
For people who have special preferences, right? Some people want history, but some others say, you know what, I have my history in the banking app. I don't want it here because now, how do I maintain consistency? What if this is off, and so on? Because your SMS inbox doesn't have all the transactions. It only has the ones they notify you of. But there may be some other transactions that are only your bank knows, right? So there's a lot of things around accuracy and consistency and so on. It's a much more complex problem. But what we are trying to do is whatever channel businesses want to communicate with consumers on, right? Mm-hmm. We want to make it richer and more intelligent with automation and so on, right? And the point is, today, most messages that come in are sort of just dumb one-way notifications, right? It tells you, oh, something happened. It's like somebody tells you, oh, there's a fire. It's like, yeah, but if there's a fire, you need to do like 2, 3, or 4 things, right? Meaning you get a credit card notification. Maybe you want to report fraud, like I didn't do this. Or you get a package, you get an order confirmation, and then you want to see package tracking status, right? Maybe today or tomorrow. or you get a booking and then you want to upgrade your flight. There's always a next action, right? So the key insight really is every message is the starting point for every one-way message is the starting point for a two-way conversation, right? So that's what we are enabling. Now the challenge is on what channel do you do that, right? And the reason why I agree with you, the reason why many people think the messaging app is dead is because it's so limited. It's limited, it's one way, it can be spammy sometimes, you can't act on it, you can't respond to it, it's just very, very restricted. But on the other hand, if we made it richer and intelligent and structured and organized and so on, right? And I like to describe it that, Gupshup is sort of taking the mess out of messaging. If we can make it sort of cleaner, simpler, easier to use, more intelligent. Imagine if your every bill pay, if it's within a certain limit, gets automatically paid. Now you're never going to miss a payment. You're not going to have that penalty, for example, and so on, right? So these are the kind of things, intelligent things that we are putting in.
What's a little more frustrating for someone like me is that I also have to manage multiple apps, right? Like you always wish that it was just one thing, and like the messages and the OTPs today. Like I don't know. I think the TRI regulation changes that. If you have your single, I guess code, then all the communication comes from that one specific number or 5-digit SMS code. Then it basically groups all the communication from a specific entity into one,
Correct.
message box, right? Today it can come from hundreds of different messaging, it comes from different numbers, come from different things, which is extremely frustrating in itself. So I see where you're going.
Yeah, so I agree. It's broken. It's broken in many different ways. It's broken for the consumer. It's also broken for the enterprise, right? Enterprises don't want to, because enterprises know, for example, that there are certain users who love getting offers and certain users who don't, right? But if they don't have a good mechanism for this two-way communication and control, they can't offer that control to the user to say, okay, look, you like deals, we'll send you deals, but somebody else doesn't want them. Okay, no problem, right? So I think there's a problem on both sides. And ultimately, look, the channel, there's multiple things, right? Any messaging system has sort of there's the server, the sending side, there's the client, the receiving side, and then the channel in between, right? And all three have to become richer and more intelligent, right? Each of those pieces. So on the client side, like I said, we've done these deals with handset manufacturers to make the clients richer and more intelligent, because there's some things, again, for data security and privacy can only be done on the device, right? So any AI that we do, that data doesn't come to the server, it's just on the device, right? And then on the server side, you have to have a chatbot platform and APIs and integrations to link it to whatever you want. And then the channel in the middle has to enable these rich formats, right? It has to enable rich media and cards and buttons and chatbots and things like that. So it's a lot of work, because it's a very very large and sort of fragmented ecosystem. But as it happens, I think it'll be a real game changer. And I think we are right in the middle of it, and we are pioneering a lot of new solutions that I think, like I said, we're going to be rolling out very quickly. So hopefully we can address most of your issues, if not all, in the next few weeks and months. Yeah.
Very cool. I've always had this question. You mentioned that we get a ton of promotional codes and other bits of messages on our phones. Are they actually useful? Do any of these enterprises see value there? What are the conversion rates normally for these kind of promos?
So yeah, it's low. And by the way, that's also the reason why it's declined. See, I'll say the following about promotional messages, right? It's sort of one person's deal is another person's spam, right? A lot of messages, it's a matter of context. If you're interested, if you're looking for something, or you're at a mall and saying, okay, let's see if there's a McDonald's deal before I go into the thing, I mean, you'd love it, right? It's just that if you got that same message while you're in the middle of a meeting, it feels like spam, right? So, but all of us, I mean, nobody misses out on a coupon or a deal when you want it. It's just that most businesses don't know when the customer wants it, so they kind of just do spray and pray, which leads to the problem, right? So it's a false choice. It's a false dichotomy of saying, okay, either you get you send a lot of offers or send no offers at all, right? And I think so. So I think right now we are dealing with very very blunt approaches to say, okay, let's shut down all promotional because it's annoying. It's like, yeah, but then some people miss out on it and some new business models. I mean, look, the advertising business model is the foundation of the internet, right? Yep. So done intelligently, just that Google and Facebook do it a lot smarter than everybody else. So the promotional thing is all about context. And I think that's also what we are trying to do, which is, and context comes from communication, engagement, data, and so on. And of course, there's some privacy issues you have to be careful about. But if you enable that, right? So the old way of advertising, where you just do an SMS promotional campaign, yes, it's expensive and it's also low conversion rates, and it doesn't happen very much today. Like 90+% of the industry is all what's called transactional, not promotional.
Right.
Okay. Right. But going forward, I think we'll be able to sort of thread that needle of saying, okay, people who want those offers can get it for as long as they want it, right? Let's say you're shopping for a new smartphone, then you get all these deals maybe for a week or a month, and then you stop getting them because you can switch it on and off as needed. Or you're standing at a mall and say, show me offers in this location right now. And you get it, for the next half an hour, and then you're done. So I think that's the way to sort of solve that problem. Again, with context, it can be very productive.
Fantastic. Hey, Beerud, this has been a great chat. Are you guys hiring right now?
Yes, we are.
Who are we looking
like
for?
I said, we're driving a lot of innovation. It's a very exciting space. I think
it's a global business.
It's a global, yeah. So we're expanding globally as well. I mean, I like to, there aren't too many businesses, innovative businesses, born in India that are bringing technology to the rest of the world. And we'd like to be one of those, right? So, of course, there are a lot of innovative businesses succeeding in India, but not sort of in the global tech ecosystem. And I think we are, we're doing that successfully. And I think we're looking to hire good people in a lot of areas. There's a lot of growth and so on. And so we're a very large scale company, high growth company, and a lot of good things in the roadmap as well.
So I leave the link to the careers page wherever I post the podcast. Appreciate it. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening at Gupshup. Wish you guys best of luck, and hope to catch up with you at some point in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Really enjoyed the discussion. I think it was a far more thoughtful and deliberate and insightful discussion than I expected. So really appreciate you doing this.